Okay, Pilgrims Progress, Chapter 5. We are about to battle Apollyon. But before we get there, a quick recap of what has brought us to this place. As Bunyan has watched Christian travel on the Pilgrim's Way, he was in the palace for a few days. They invited him to stay, and as a matter of fact, they kept wanting him to stay a little longer. One more thing. Let me show you one more thing. And so piety, prudence, and charity, the three virtuous women who lived there, finished off his time in the palace by equipping him. So they showed him first an armory filled with battle implements of old, of biblical importance. The sling of David and the staff of Moses and the jawbone that Samson used and all that's kind of cool stuff. And then they equipped him with the armor necessary for the rest of the journey. He says he is equipped head to toe. That should obviously be a reference for the spiritual armor of God, the breastplate of righteousness and the helmet of salvation and the shoes clad of peace and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and all these sorts of things that we can catch in the epistles, and now in a very literal yet obviously allegorical sense, they get him all set up and kind of push him forward as though he is going out to something, right? This is the first time, it seems to me, in one of his stops and talking to people, that he has been maybe sent with so much preparation. Oftentimes, if you think about it, whoever he meets gives him a little something along the way. I almost feel like it's a video game with side quests where you have to earn your little piece of equipment that you need to go on to the next stage. But this one in particular, rather than just teaching him things, they have really suited him up. So he's covered head to toe in this armor, and that leads one to believe that he is about to get it face on. Yeah.
It was clad in northern steel. I wondered if that.
Okay, good question. I don't know. That caught me, but I didn't look it up. So I'm not sure exactly what the intention is. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Clad in northern steel. It's like the very last sentence of last chapter. Well, it says head to toe. Oh, what else did they give him? If you look at the back of that chapter, right, the next to last little paragraph there.
Bread, wine, and raisins.
Bread, wine, and raisins. Okay. So he is given provisions, food and drink, but let's just say anytime you're in a biblical allegory and people give you bread and wine, just the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just cause.
Yeah. Mentioned that there's a lady from that named Faithful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we're in good shape. So that's kind of our context as we start off chapter 5. Now, the one thing that I think is really worth the notice, not only has he been equipped with armor, he is wearing it. Now, if you can imagine a suit of armor, like from a movie and a knight in shining armor or whatever, it's big pieces of metal, right? And oftentimes the knight in shining armor is riding on a horse.
Because you can't walk.
Because you can't walk very far if you're wearing heavy armor. It's slow, it's cumbersome, it's heavy. So I think we ought to go into the chapter expecting a fight not far from the future, but you don't put all that armor on unless you are thinking you're going to need it right away. They're carry it in your backpack or something. But if you go out clad head to toe, that means you expect to be in battle right away. And so that brings us into chapter 5, where he is in battle right away. All right. Now he leaves the palace, and the first stop on his path. Did you catch what that was? The Valley of
Humiliation.
Humiliation. Now, what do you think? Again, because this is very directly allegorical. 1 + 1 = 2, as much as possible in this Valley of Humiliation. What do you think? What do you think he's trying to describe here?
They're gonna bring up things that he would not want to do.
Okay. So when we think of humiliation, what do we generally think of?
Somebody being put down. Yeah.
Say that again, Pat.
I have a hard time hearing Mary Lou when she speaks, so I don't know what she said.
Stupid things we've done,
Oh, okay.
right? So yeah, when we think of humiliation, generally speaking, we almost equate it directly with embarrassment, right? So the things that we've done that we're ashamed of, the things that when we remember them or when we're in the middle of them, they make us feel small or foolish or lesser or whatever. So is there another way to describe humiliation?
Becoming humble.
Becoming humble. That's right. So it is a little more archaic of a use. To humiliation or to humiliate oneself is equated with humbling oneself. Now we like, biblically, we like humbling because we know that we're supposed to be humble, but we don't really like humiliation because that makes us think of embarrassment.
Yeah.
Right. So these two definitions work together in some degree, and to some degree they edge apart, and a lot of that is kind of a change in language to some extent. But can bad humiliation lead to good humiliation?
Yeah.
Yes.
How so?
When you realize that you have done something that you're embarrassed about, then faced with the same situation, you could avoid making the same.
Okay, good.
Pat, can you hear me now? Can you hear
That
me?
was better. Thank you.
What else? How could bad humiliation lead to good humiliation?
Well, you learn from it.
Learn from it.
You could be so proud that you don't see that you're not as good as you think you are. And so something like that can bring you down.
Right. When you are self-assured, cocky even, and then you screw up, or it turns out you're wrong, that can make you feel bad, obviously, but it can also remind you to not act that way, which is positive. You can take it, sometimes the being wrong, it kind of smarts for a second. Smarts hurts, but then it can make you smarter, where you learn from that and you try to adjust accordingly. We've all had a moment where we were 100% absolutely positively sure we knew something for a fact, and then somebody looks it up online or whatever, and you're like,
You're right.
oh. So humiliation in a negative sense, reminding us of the bad stuff, catching us in the bad stuff, remembering the bad, any of this kind of thing, could then lead to the positive humiliation of the humbling oneself, retaining our humility. All of these words come from the Latin humus, like hummus means dirt.
Dirt.
Earth. Because hummus, you take the chickpeas and you ground them up and it looks like dirt, like mud, like soil, clay. And so to be humble is to be close to the earth, be close to the dirt, to be lowly. We can use humble in a variety of ways, but we generally think of them as either that negative humiliation or sort of the positive sense of being satisfied with what God has given us in its simplicity, and not grasping and striving above for more. That make sense?
Kind of accepting who we are.
Yeah, right. This is explained throughout the Bible in multiple ways. The one that comes to my mind immediately, the parable of Jesus, where we're barely even a parable. It's more like for instance, to go to the feast and sit at the head of the table and have to be told, that's not your chair, you need to go back. Like, that's humiliating. But when you sit at the worst seat and your host says, oh, please, my friend, you have to come forward, sit next to me, that's being exalted. So those who exalt themselves will be humble. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Think of yourself less often, but also maybe less grandly, and allow God to raise us up, not our own pride and ego. So this is kind of, I'm sort of repeating the same thing over and over, but basically what's going to happen in this valley of humiliation? He's going to be assaulted, and we're going to have this battle with Apollyon, the destroyer. And while it will become physical, the first strikes that Apollyon has against him are what? The verbal, by saying, oh yeah, remember that crummy thing that you did? Remember how unfaithful you were at that moment? Remember when you screwed all that up? You belong to me. So he is being humiliated by being reminded of his failings. But the negative humiliation can still become a positive humiliation if the reminder of our failings doesn't cause us to despair, to quit, to give up, to fail. The reminder of our failings points us to our need for God's grace and the affirmation that we receive it. God has forgiven me nonetheless. You're right, I did do that lousy thing. And the fact that God forgives me only increases my love for him. So there is a proper humiliation where the you did a bad thing just sort of reminds him of the sort of lowly estate that doesn't make you feel bad. It actually lifts your head because God is doing the lifting and not you. It's not, I'm such a great guy. It is being reminded of all the ways that God has offered you grace and mercy again and again. God is exalting you because you're humble. You recognize your need, and you receive, and all that sort of good stuff. So this is why I think we are in a valley of humiliation. Also because I've never worn a suit of armor. I've worn like pads and equipment and uniforms and stuff like that. But I am extrapolating through my imagination that when you put on that suit of armor, you actually feel pretty awesome. You start clunking around, and once you get over the awkwardness and the heaviness of it, you actually feel a little awesome, maybe a little indestructible. You start feeling kind of powerful and good about yourself. All the more reason then to stay grounded, to stay humble. And that's what's going to happen in this interaction. So he starts off with this staying on the narrow path, Where is Apollyon?
Wait,
Geographically or spatially in comparison to Christian and his path.
Off to the side, came running across the meadow.
Okay.
Where did the word Apollyon? I've not run into that much.
Destroyer.
I mean, I can tell you that it's derived from the Greek. But I think it is, I think it's probably an archaism that was referred, ways to reference like demonic spiritual forces. Sort of in the same way that we might, Satan, the devil, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Mephistopheles, blah, 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 blah.
All names we've heard.
Right.
This one was.
Right, because it's kind of functional. So, to refer to the devil or his minions as Apollyon would be as the destroyer. Similarly, when you refer to the devil or his minions as Satan, we're actually using a term from the Hebrew, the accuser. And what are some of the principal effects of the devil? To accuse and to destroy. Okay. So we remember that Christian is equipped with all this armor. Now, interestingly enough, they did not, to my recollection, when they equipped him, go over exactly whatever piece was. Kind of like, you almost, I sort of expected it. Like, go ahead and just, recap that the breastplate is righteousness and the helmet of salvation. But they didn't. They just, he's filled with armor, he's covered head to toe. We have what I find to be sort of a fun juxtaposition that when he describes Apollyon, what do you note about the description? See if we saw the same thing. The beast was hideous and clothed with scales like a fish. These were his pride. And that struck me almost like a parallel to the biblical description of the armor of God, where we're given a piece of armor and it's related then to an element of theology or faith. And then we're looking at the structure of the destroyer, and we're given an element that's kind of it's got sort of a sinful counterpart. Scales like a fish, these were his pride.
Right.
I take that in a couple of ways. Number one, pride, like I'm proud of them. But number two, kind of like the breastplate of righteousness is your righteousness, the scales of destroyer are pride. Can you connect being covered in fish scales with pride? How? That's my implied question. How?
They can be pretty and colorful.
Pretty and colorful. That's nice. We often think about certain fish, and when the light catches them or the water, it's almost iridescent or shiny or whatever. What are scales for?
They're for protection.
Protection. When we think about fantastical creatures like a dragon, we often describe it as having scaly skin. And by that, we mean something kind of hard, textured. And that hardness and that texture is a layer of protection. Same thing with fish scales. They are the outer protective layer, not just skin, but something on top of that. Because you can actually scrape scales off and you don't go right into the flesh, you get the skin of the fish. So the scales are like the fish's armor. And so this is like the armor of the destroyer, Apollyon. And so can pride, which can be beautiful, it can look pretty, can pride also be like armor?
Mm-hmm.
How so? I should just skip to that part. How can pride be like armor?
The more you feel proud, let's say,
Mhm.
the more you will resist things people say about you.
Okay, okay, good. So as you absorb or things come at you, actions, words, circumstances, if you are so self-assured, these things, you don't absorb these things, they bounce off you. Why? Because you're awesome. You say what you want to say, I don't care. It could be an insult, boop, bounces off me. It could be a helpful concern, boop, I don't care. It could be a request, boop, doesn't matter to me because I'm the best. And if I'm the best and I'm awesome and I'm great, who cares what you think? Who cares what you say? You can envision maybe somebody who's just super duper proud and they're just kind of strutting, not even paying attention to what's going on. As a matter of fact, there's a commercial, and because I mostly watch like, streaming stuff on YouTube or whatever, I see this commercial, what feels like constantly, but it's about a car company who's got like an automatic pedestrians, like, oh, somebody stops, and it's supposed to be funny that the car stops even for people like this guy, and this guy, like, he just sort of, he's looking at his phone and laughing obnoxiously loud, and he's bumping into people, or he's slamming doors behind him, or he walks directly into the crosswalk without paying attention. If you look, Layla, yeah, she's like, okay, good, thanks. I feel dumb because I see it all the time. So I mean, it's funny the first time, and then it's like, all right, I got it. So anyway, that sort of pride, which makes you almost oblivious to even the good things, or even the things that might be for your benefit, because you don't care, because it's like you're above it all. So the destroyer is so full of self-assured pride. It is the scaly armor that protects him. As a matter of fact, what is Christian's primary weapon, offensive weapon? A sword.
Sword.
Which we would say scripturally is the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. It's like quoting scripture, whatever. Imagine then, the word of God, and it's going to hit a barrier, a resistance. It's going to, be deflected by pride. I don't need that. I don't care. Doesn't apply to me. I'm great the way it is, whatever it might be. So I think that was it was sort of a fun parallel, I thought, taking a sin or a depravity and sort of juxtaposing it against a virtue, because the destroyer is not without his own armor and weapons. There, like kind of that negative image, the mirrored image or the shadowy reflection of the good thing is in the bad.
One thing it did note about Christian's armor, you were referring to it, he has no armor on his back.
Yeah, right.
Very good. So, yeah, let's get to that because I think he's making a point that he wants us to catch.
Yeah.
So, all right. Apollyon gets basically closer and closer to the path. Christian resists the temptation to run, and he first stands firm, and eventually, he will go forward. But remember that Apollyon is now approaching him, and he is even going to get on the path and cover it. He's going to stretch out and block his way completely. So now there's no way forward except through. All right. Where did you come from? Where are you going? What does Christian say? City of destruction, city of Zion. Aha! City of destruction. I know the city of destruction. Why does Apollyon know the city of destruction?
It's
I'm the
huge.
king.
Yeah.
I own that city. I own you. And so we get this little, kind of this whole page here is going to be a little back and forth of basically scripture references that have been turned into analogies and kind of these one-to-one metaphors. Yes, I was born in your land, the city of destruction, doomed from my birth. But you worked us too hard, and no man can live on your wages. I mean, that was again, it's a little on the nose, but what is he referring to? For the wages of sin, yeah,
Yeah.
but the free gift of God is eternal life. So you are born into slavery. You are born into the slavery bondage of sin, of brokenness, of missing the mark, of being estranged and separated from God, from each other, even from ourselves. And the compensation that you are paid is your own death. The wages of sin being death, I thought was always such an evocative phrase because a wage is what you earn.
Yeah.
When you do work, you receive compensation for that work in the form of a wage. When you sin, you earn death. When you belong to sin and you work for it, go do that. And you say, yes, sir. And you go do it. Well, when you get your paycheck at the end of the month, it says on your W-2, what'd you earn? Death. You've earned destruction and loss and suffering. And so what is Christian's response? Forget that noise. I'm out of here, as any mature, sensible person ought to do. Sure, when I was young and I didn't know any better, I worked for you. But as soon as I learned different, I found a better job. Well, who are you going to go work for if not for me? Who? He's going to work for the king. I have sold myself to the king of princes. A servant cannot obey two masters. We, being redeemed, bought back and paid for, aren't our own masters, but we belong to another. As a matter of fact, we were bought for a price. And yet, remember that the yoke, the tool of work to put the beasts of burden in a line and in control so they would pull in the direction they're supposed to, that the yoke of our new master is easy and light, and it gives life rather than the wages of death. Well, Apollyon is unhappy with this. So what's his retort? He's got kind of a response to Christian belonging to another king.
And you complained about your wages. I'll pay you all that we can afford.
Well, that was, again, he's kind of driving the wage metaphor into the ground, but it's kind of a good one. Kind of a neat little thought. Oh, I tell you what, I'll double your pay, which is sort of true in a sense, but it's not very enticing now, is it?
No.
If we think about the currency of hell, do you really want your pay to be doubled? Get the coffee. But his major retort to is basically, you'll come crawling back. You are very happy with running away from me. You think you've got it all figured out. You'll come crawling back. They all do. Now, is he telling the truth? No.
No.
But like the most insidious of lies, like the most destructive of lies, there is truth in it.
Yeah.
Do some turn back?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the lie is to say what is possible and what has happened must happen. It is an eventuality. That's where it becomes something that's plausible, something that might give you pause or doubt, but then it's overplayed in order to frighten you. So the lie is you'll come crawling back, but there's enough truth in the possibility that it has to be dealt with. There's real fear there. There's real temptation there. There's real risk there. Remember, you remember where you're born and where you're from. And they always go back. And we even kind of sense, I think, a practical truth to that. I think it's rare for people who feel no tug at all to some place or time of their past, where you grew up, where you went to school, where your family first got established, whatever. Some place where if anybody, where are you from, whatever that means. I like to poke at Lula by saying she's from Missouri, because she was born in Missouri. Her dad is a surgeon, and he was one of his residencies was at a hospital in Missouri, and that happened to be where Lula was. So all 5 kids were born someplace totally different. And she lived in Missouri as a newborn, but they moved on to the next place within a year, maybe even months. But I like to poke at her that she's from Missouri. Very clearly she grew up in South Florida, basically spent almost her entire life, until adulthood in Fort Lauderdale. But I like to remind her that she is not a native Floridian. And when something about Missouri will come up on TV or whatever, I always look at her like, "Your people." So not that Missouri has any tug for her at all, but there's something to this about, well, you're from the city of destruction, and that's going to mean something, whether you want to deny it or not. And there is a connection there. Even the grace of God does not change where we're from. I will say it doesn't just change where we're going. That's true. I am fully and completely convinced that grace works backwards in our lives, and it affects where we're from, but it doesn't change it. Like it doesn't negate it. It works backwards in our life, because even when we think about it, salvation and grace and mercy changes our understanding of even the bad things in our past. It works backwards to be a part of the story that God has mercy on us through. We can look back at some of our worst things, and instead of being devastated, be grateful and thankful. In the same way, how does a Christian respond? Apollyon nails him. Here's 5 times. "Oh, Mr. High and Mighty Faithful One, that you royally screwed it." And Christian's response every time is what? He says, "You're right. As a matter of fact, there's a few that you missed." Did you catch that? That's pretty good. You were right in every time you brought that up. You're absolutely right. There are a few more that you did bring up, but you could have, because those were, I screwed them too. But every one of those becomes a testament to God's graciousness.
Yeah.
And it becomes a part of his own gratitude. So being from the city of destruction is no longer a point of shame. It is a point of joy. You're not condemning me to going back. All it does is make me even more grateful that God has saved a city of destruction boy like me. So,
Can I answer that?
yeah, please.
That question of, where have you been and where are you going makes me think of, Abraham's, slave girl, Ishmael's.
Hagar.
Hagar. Because isn't that what the angel said to her, is where have you come from?
Ah,
Where are you
very
going?
good.
When he does one backwards.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, God works retroactively in a way you can't even understand it, but it's just true. It's true and Christian takes each of these barbs, and he is able to, I don't know if we would call them even deflections. He receives them all. They just don't hurt him. They don't hurt them because that which has been meant to hurt us, God has intended for our good. Let's see. And now we are basically, that was all the stuff that Apollyon was assuming would work. I will humiliate you by reminding you of your failings. And the humiliation, the bad humiliation, can become the good humiliation when we take the memory of failures and embarrassments and take it to be humble and receptive to mercy and grace, which is exactly what he does. And eventually that just kind of, he just sort of, Apollyon seems to kind of run out of ammo. Like this, the making you feel bad about yourself just not working. So I'm on, yeah.
I just have thought that I feel like, we talked about the armor that he's wearing for this great battle, but isn't some of the greatest battles is all of here?
Sure. Absolutely.
And that's what he was just faced with.
That's right. So I think it's noteworthy that the battle is kind of in two pieces. We're about to leave the telling you rotten memories, and we're about to get into a very physical confrontation. But this is where it starts. It starts not with being torn up and stabbed and bleeding and hurting. It starts with words of fear and words of suffering and words of humiliation. And how often is it that that's where, like you said, the real battle is? And I'm going to say that by and large, how many real problems that we face in life never get past that interior point. To say you have nothing to fear but fear itself is almost practically true. The fear of the thing is nearly always worse than the thing itself. Our imagination's running amok about how much it's going to hurt, how destructive it's going to be, how worrisome, how we're going to lose everything, whatever else. That's what upsets us and depresses us or makes us want to quit, not so much the thing. I'm a firm believer that everybody needs to get punched a couple of times. And everybody needs to take a punch physically. Because I think it is a very basic, fundamental human fear, physical injury. And by getting it out of the way, it's like getting that first scratch on the car, on a new car. Once it's done, it's done. So you don't have to like be terrified of the possibility you've experienced it.
And when you get the next one, oh well.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say if you get punched once, you're going to learn to love it. I mean, being punched, especially being punched the right/wrong way, hurts. But now you're afraid about what it actually is, not what your imagination suggests it might be. You know, I'm going to get punched and I'm going to die. I'm going to get punched and my face is going to explode. I'm going to get punched and everyone's going to laugh. I'm going to whatever. Now the punch though can be extrapolated and applied in a variety of circumstances. Now it can start becoming more abstract. To be punched means to be in a tough situation where you take, you know, somebody's nasty comment, or you take a tough circumstance where you lose something precious, or you have to suffer through it, whatever it might be. And that's like I took a punch in life. It wasn't, but it was an assault on our emotions or on our character or on our livelihood. And then after you endure it, after you get past it, how many of those were nowhere near as bad as a true experience as the fear of it was? Some things that we are desperately afraid of, when the worst case scenario occurs, it's not good, but it was nowhere near what we thought it would be.
Yeah.
I cannot endure that, except I did. Maybe because it's not so bad, or maybe like we said before, as the Lord brings us through, even those past moments of shame or destruction, the grace works backwards. And now it's like the wounds of the resurrected Christ. Look at what the Lord has done for me. I made it through. He brought me through even that. My martial arts students, especially the little ones, I gear them up with the pads and stuff, but then I punch every single one of them. Not like I'm trying to destroy them, but I give them with a little bit of legitimate adult force. Almost every one of them, I knock them on their butt. Just a little jab, boom. I mean, I'm gloved up too, but we're on a pad. They're padded up. Are you ready? Boom, and I knock them on their butt. Because I would rather it occur in this very controlled environment. And now they're going to get up, and a couple of them like, you know, I had a couple of tears, and it's not because it hurts so bad that it scared them. But you know what? Now it's done. You're scared of the shot in the doctor's office, but then it's done. You're not scared anymore. I mean, it might be a little sore, but you're not scared anymore. So we've moved from kind of the fear of the thing itself. He sees the terror of this beast and all how creepy and destructive and frightening it is. He has withstood the assault on his own failures and memories. And now Apollyon the Destroyer has crawled onto the path, blocked it completely. You can't go any further. And now they're gonna throw down. Like now we're to the point where it's on. And so we move from kind of a more emotional plane to a pretty practical and physical one, right? It first starts off with a fiery dart. Again, the fiery darts of the devil. The shield is able to absorb some of that. I'm reading from the kind of 88 near the top. Christian drew his sword quickly, knowing it was time to attack, but Apollyon was quicker, charged at him, shooting darts as thick as hail. Christian did all he could to defend himself and fight back, but Apollyon began to overpower him and inflicted wounds to his head, his hand, his foot. So let's backtrack just a hair to bring up something that Bruce mentioned earlier. Christian has no armor on his back. Why?
We don't have armor on the back, like the armor that God gives us is over the front, it's not for the back.
So why?
Because we don't have to worry about the back attack. He has our back. It's the front over the
Right.
front that comes from it.
So yeah, we can take this a couple of directions. Number one, God's got our back. So, we don't have to worry so much about the second guessing element that looking backward tends to be correlated with. But also, there's no protection for cowardice. Let me throw that out there. There's no protection for cowardice. When you turn and run, in essence, you are dropping your armor. If you are the shield is faith, and the breastplate covering your chest is righteousness. You face a foe, and if you show your back to the foe, it's implying, isn't it, that you've turned and you're running away. So where is faith and righteousness when you run away from your temptation or problem? So in essence, we give up our greatest advantage when we cut and run. Our greatest advantage protects our front, because to be a disciple means to follow, and following moves forward. So if, like the footsteps of Jesus, think about that. Even if it circles back around, if we're following, we're not walking backwards. We might circle back around ourselves if we're following him, but that's still a moving forward action. Again, to bring up martial arts again, this is more of a kind of a Far Eastern ethic. It's sort of related to the like elements of Bushido, but there's a description for what we would call a maneuver moving backwards. So like you're stepping forward with these blocks, you can also step backwards and you sort of do the same motion in reverse. And it's called hujin, which the more literal translation is not backwards, it's advancing to the rear. Because you don't run away, you advance to the rear. Now, it's sort of splitting hairs at that point. But to be frank, even the hujin maneuver, so I'm moving forward, now I'm advancing to the rear. The hujin maneuver is not this, it's this. So we are still keeping the faith, the righteousness between us and our attacker. We're not turning around to run, we're advancing to the rear. Even if we have to retreat, you ever watch any movies that do like old battles with armies in formation, whether they're firing muskets or they have got swords and stuff? What happens when one of the sides starts to lose? Do you know tactically what they're supposed to do? When they retreat, like maybe they call retreat, or they pound drums, or they blow bugles or whatever that signals retreat. What is the retreat supposed to look like? Orderly. Even if you have to flee, you flee orderly. When they turn and run, it's what they call a rout. And in a rout, again, it's just military tactics. the defender or the losing side has basically given up everything and they're fair game to pick off. So if you're moving forward and they've turned their back to you, they can't protect themselves at all. You just run up and stab them or shoot them or whatever. They're helpless. Why? Because they panicked. If they had retreated in an orderly fashion, you're backing up, but you can still do something. And so the other army kind of has to stay on its guard. They can't sweep over you. They can still advance. They can still push you away, but they're sort of doing it cautiously too, just in case. Because a sword pointed at me can still stab me, even if it's outnumbered. But if he turns and runs, there's nothing pointing at me. We follow? So we think practically, or as a disciple, we think theologically. The difference between retreating from a sin, a temptation, or a difficulty versus fleeing, turning and running, cowering. Maybe this is one that we're not going to win, or maybe this is one we shouldn't engage and we need to back away. But if you just sort of turn your back and scramble off in a panic, maybe you're going to be defenseless. I always try to tell my kids, how many problems has panic ever solved? Because the answer, I believe, is none. Panic never helps. Panic is that overwhelmed, emotional freak out where you sort of lose the ability to make good responses, choices, whatever. So even at the worst, don't panic, because the panic is not helping you deal with the worst. Panic is making the worst even worse.
What's been happening in Ukraine when the Russians think they've overpowered the city, Ukrainians keep going forward and chase them out. They retreat. Keep coming back.
Well, again, for military tactics, you can lose a battle and still win a war. So if you retreat in orderly fashion, all those guys can fight another day. But if you turn and panic, not only are they defenseless and can get killed very easily, but maybe those guys are going to scatter off in the woods and you're never going to see them again. They're going to go run and hide or run home or something. You lose the ability to fight again later. So it becomes very important, even if you've lost, to try to keep it together as much as possible and live to fight another day. You can lose a battle and still win a war. Can that happen in our life as disciples? I am convinced absolutely. I lose battles all the time. Battles with other people, battles with my expectations, battles with myself and my discipline, whatever it might be. But, the promise is that Christ is leading us through those things and past those things. So the battles aren't the end. The war is ongoing. As a matter of fact, he's actually achieved victory already. So the battles that I might lose are sort of not particularly consequential to the ultimate outcome. And that ought to be sort of a comforting thought. Okay. How does this battle finish?
One of his swords gets knocked out of his hand.
Okay.
There's another.
No, my impression was it fell beside him and he picked it up again.
Then he kills.
Right. Okay, it's gone on for half a day. He's exhausted. He's growing weaker, and he's been wounded all over the place. He's thrown down by his opponent. The sword flies out. I've got you now. Ha 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 ha. But by the grace of God, while Apollyon was preparing for the fatal blow, he's just sort of like reaching. He feels it, grabs it. And then he announces, it's not time to celebrate, because when I fall, I will rise. And that's like his one-liner as he stabs at Apollyon. When I fall, I will rise. Why is that so powerful? He's been fighting unsuccessfully for an entire day. What about, why is this the one-liner that allows him to finally make the sort of stab that knocks the monster back?
Like the resurrection.
Reference to Christ rising.
Right. Yeah. So this is, even this is, the words of Tolkien, this is the eucatastrophe. This is the disaster which results in triumph. This is death that results in life. This is humbling oneself so that God might exalt us. This is dying to self that we might rise with Christ. And that is the one-liner as the action hero gets the villain, and Apollyon falls backwards as though mortally wounded. There is something implicit in here, which I think is also sort of worth noting, which is, when I fall, I will rise. Following seems to be an eventuality, but it doesn't lead to our destruction and loss. I like the thought of never falling. I think about if it's a battle or if it's a competition, I don't ever want to get knocked down. Like, I'm thinking through mentally how I want the game to go. I never want to get down on the scoreboard. I want to be in the lead the entire time. But that's not what's implicit. What seems implied very strongly is we will fall. As a matter of fact, it's necessary to fall. But it's in that moment, when we are weak, he is strong. And at his most vulnerable, he actually becomes his most successful.
Because even Christ fell for the cross.
That's right. Christ stumbles and falls. Christ dies. Yeah. But even the grain of seed must go into the ground before it might rise to life. Yeah.
And when Jesus said to Peter, when Peter was going to fall, and he says, when you return, strengthen your brothers. When you come back, strengthen.
Right. And then he swings again. More than conquerors through him who loved us.
Yeah.
And now he's got it. So Apollyon flies off in his dragon wings, and we got a winner. He gives thanks. It's a little funny to me that the very super Protestant / Reformed take is thankful to Michael.
Yeah,
I like that. That's fun.
it was sort of odd.
Yeah. I mean, very scriptural, but it's just not the sort of thing that you would expect in a very Reformed text to bring up. But I thought that was fun. Michael the Archangel. And how is Christian, who is beaten, bloodied to a pulp with wounds all over his body, a hand appears and offers him leaves from the tree of life, and he is healed immediately. So even after being beaten by the destroyer almost to death, the tree of life, in whose leaves are healing, restores him immediately. And what does he do?
He eats bread and drinks wine.
Time for Eucharist. That's right. Eucharist, the bread and wine, which, coming from the Greek, what does Eucharist mean? Thanksgiving. It means Thanksgiving. The battle is won. Thanksgiving. It is a celebration. That is why the person who leads the liturgy in the beginning of the service, where there's scripture readings and prayers, may be referred to as the officiant, because you are officiating the proceedings. But when it shifts to the Eucharist, that priest is always referred to as the celebrant. It is a celebration of thanksgiving. And that's precisely what Christian does. All right, last little section. We kind of took a long time on Apollyon because I thought that was the most interesting. He goes into the valley of the shadow of death. Gosh, third psalm, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But let's describe this valley for just a sec.
Scary.
It is scary and it gets dark. So he's really having to walk very carefully and gingerly. And what is so terrifying about walking through this valley? Lonely, desolate. Matter of fact, he meets a couple of people who are coming the other way, who try to discourage him with words of fear. It's worse than you thought. No one can make it.
It's like he's walking through hell with the smoke all around.
Right? So here's the biggest part of this vision. The path, which has always been described as narrow, it gets really narrow. And I'm almost envisioning like he has to kind of walk sideways, and every footstep seems to make a difference. On one side, if he slips off, there's the miry clay, which mercifully God pulls us out of and sets our feet upon the rock. But if you slip down on that side, what's going to happen in the mire? You're going to get stuck, and you can even drown. Mire is basically like swamp. Imagine mucky quicksand. King David, the psalmist, rescued me from the miry clay, set my feet upon the rock. So you can get out of this, but boy, you sure want to avoid it. What's on the other side? This drop off into the mouth of hell. You ever driven in the mountains?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The shoulder gets very narrow, and you look over, you're just like kind of, oh boy, it just drops off. You start going real slow, real slow. So up in seminary, they have what is referred to as Swanny Fog. Certain times of the year, the fog will roll in because when you're on top of the mountain, and that fog is super, super thick. And it's rolled in on me a couple of times when I was driving. And it's no joke because it happens fast and it goes so thick. Driving in fog, even around here, which is rare, but it can happen, like your headlights, which should help you see, actually make things worse. And a really just kind of
Yeah.
Swanny Fog was so bad. And remember, depending on where you were on campus, you could be on the edge of a cliff. I literally did this. I could see nothing in front of me. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out so I could see the edge of the road next to my tire, and I inched forward. That's how bad. So I'm imagining the smoke and the fume and the darkness and the shadow and everything is rolling across, and the path has gotten so narrow, and the only light seems to be the fires of hell. And there's burning and there's screaming and it's spewing forth fume and smoke like a terrible volcano. When I think of the 23rd Psalm, that's not what I have in mind. I'm thinking of the valley of the shadow of death as being very, very dark and very like scary because you can't see. That's like the shadow. But this is more like you can't really see, but you can see. But if you slip, you like fall into hell. I mean, it's pretty stark. This is like the worst place he's ever been. Now, as he is trying to inch forward, like me trying to get through the fog, a couple of things happen. And this was maybe one of the creepiest parts. He starts to hear something. What does he hear that struck you as being creepy? I'm assuming you kind of had a similar response to me. He gets dreadful sounds of what I assume is like wailing and gnashing of teeth kind of stuff.
But they're whispering suggestions to him. These voices that are coming out of the dark.
Terrible suggestions and blasphemies. And they're whispering to him. And what's the absolute worst part of this? They whisper with the sound of his own voice. That's creepy if you think about it. It's almost impossible to tell that there's something whispering to him. The assumption is this is all happening in my, I'm thinking these terrible thoughts. And that is both relating allegorically a theological and practical reality, but it's also sort of like a horror movie moment.
Yeah, where it says he didn't have the discretion to stop listening or to understand the real source of these wicked thoughts.
Yes.
That's scary. Yeah.
Absolutely. To think dreadful things. Have you ever thought a dreadful thing? Have you ever thought a shameful thought? Have you ever struggled internally with something that you're embarrassed to even admit you struggled with?
Yeah.
This is that moment. This is in the valley of the shadow of death with hell looming, having the very worst thoughts pass through your mind, and yet they are the whispers of another taking your own voice, tempting you, pleading with you to accept it as your own. And how easy it would be to just say, well, yeah, I guess it's all true because I'm the one saying it. How does he get through that?
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
That's right. He remembers God with him, even in the worst places. Even if he could not see him, even if he could not see God, God could see him. And others have gone before. There's an encouragement to know wherever I am, as terrible as this is, you must be able to make it through because others have. So surely God brought them through and will bring me through as well. The dawn breaks, for he has turned the shadow of death into the morning. Daylight shows just how tight and narrow and ugly it was. He can look back and say, man, glad I made it through there. But then what does the daylight reveal about its path to come?
Just as bad.
Just as bad, it might even be worse. But at least he can go forward in the light, because as he looks at it, there's no way he could navigate what's coming next in the darkness. And we close off with pagan and pope, and I think he's just taking shots. And they're not even, they seem a little half-hearted because they just sort of happen right at the end. And they just sort of talk about little possible conflicts or temptations, and Pope is so old and rickety, all it can do is just sort of leer and grin at him, and but he knows now he's headed towards this next part. Anything else on chapter 5?
I think that scripture, though I walked in the valley of the shadow of death, that meant a lot to him to have that. It seemed like it was a new tool to use the scripture.
And so this was, there are things that we know, but we almost don't know that we know them until we need them. We can say, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, thou art with me, thou art thy son, they cover me, blah, 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 blah. And then you feel it. You are in one of those moments that feels like this. And all of a sudden, those words ring a little different. I mean, I always knew it. Yeah. That means a lot right now. And so he goes through his literal valley of the shadow of death, and the words of the psalmist are now powerfully clear because he can take them not just as a wise saying, but as a practical truth. Anything else? All right, I will end our recording.